Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, and welcome to SETI Live. My name is Simon Steele. I'm the Deputy Director of the Carl Sagan Center here at the SETI Institute, and I have great pleasure in chatting with Nathalie Cabrol, who is the Director of the Carl Sagan Center at the SETI Institute. Now, usually we're about 20 meters apart in our building in downtown Mountain View, California. But at the moment, Nat, you're about 6,000 kilometers away, give or take.
Give or take,
Give or
yes.
take, plus or minus. We're in
In the
astronomy.
middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
That's right. Welcome to SETI Live. As I said, please, indicate where you're tuning in from. We'd love to see what part of the world you are tuning in from, and of course, we will be happy to answer your questions as we go through this SETI Live. But first of all, Nat, tell me where you are and why you're there.
So I am in the Azores, in the Terceira island. It's a 400 square kilometer little rock, volcanic rock, really dark and green. In fact, it's pretty lush. I was very surprised. If you were not where you are, you'd think that you might be in Scotland somewhere. It was very impressive landing. So we're about 1,000 miles away from Portugal. And this is the archipelago of the Azores.
Now, you've got a chain of volcanic islands there, and maybe a lot of people are familiar with Hawaii as a chain of islands. Starting off in geology land, how do these islands? What are the similarity and differences between these island chains?
Well, Hawaii is a plume. There you have something different that's connected to the ridge in the Atlantic. So it's a little bit of a different setup, if you prefer. With the Azores more residual, it continues to build. There are many volcanic structures around here. I heard someone saying that last year they were in San Miguel and they had the beginning of an eruption. So it's very dynamic all the time. Whereas in Hawaii, you have a plume that's sitting on a plate that's sliding. So this is why you see a series of islands, because as the plate moves, then the plumes is popping somewhere else. Right now, the next big island in Hawaii is growing slowly underneath the surface. So very different setting, and a myth as well around the Azores, as you know, with Plato and Atlantis as well, positioning the continent island beyond the Pillars of Hercules. But I have to say there is an air of mystery about the Terceira Island, something that I cannot pinpoint since I've been here, but very, very intriguing.
That's interesting, isn't it? As you say, Hawaii is more of sort of what you call a shield volcano, and that maybe brings us. Of course, we're going to get around to talking about Mars very soon, but whereas the Azores are they part of the Mid-Atlantic plate boundary, or?
Yeah, this is where the ocean's plate spreads, and so very, very different setting.
Yeah. So what are you doing there, Nat? What's the conference you're there?
I am here. Yeah, that's a good question. It's my first time in Portugal. I was invited to give a talk at the Global Explorers Summit. So this is the GLX Summit, and it's sponsored by and organized by the Explorers Club. So you have people who are doing incredible things that are located in the hotel right now. Interesting faces that some of them some others you don't, but incredible people. So we're going to be here for 3 days to talk about space, ocean, conservation projects as well. And both space and ocean, because how we explore them is very, very related. We don't know 90% of the ocean. We don't know 90% or more of the universe, and we explore both of them in the same ways with the same technologies.
Yeah. So we're going to get back to your role. Well, there's two levels of exploration here. First of all, your exploration, and also going to talk a little bit about human exploration of other planets. I just want to call out to some people who have tuned in. So a very early arrival. Hello, Alan from New Jersey. We got people tuning in for another New Jersey. New Jersey well represented here. North Wales, Vermont, Fresno, California, Texas, and Argentina. So welcome everybody to SETI Live. Now you have just published a paper in Nature. It's called "A New Deal for the Human Exploration of Mars." Talking of explorers, and we're talking about exploring the Earth and exploring another planet. I want to go back a bit. What first got you interested in Mars? Because you're associated, in my mind, with Mars as much as exploring the Earth. What inspired you about this small red planet?
Well, in fact, I would say that Mars was almost, serendipitous in what happened. I got really interested in it and fascinated by Mars, obviously. But I was always interested in the search for life in the universe. This is really what drives me. And so Mars was there. That was the closest planetary environment to the Earth. And I got involved because I wanted to do planetary sciences and astrobiology. I got involved in interpreting the data that we had when I was a student. And these were the Viking data. We didn't have really good data from Venus. We had some images of the Voyagers, etc., but nothing like we had for Viking, where we had two orbiters and we had two landers there. So this is how I got interested in Mars. And then obviously with my husband, we developed an aspect of research on Mars, which was related to impact crater lakes. And then the priorities of NASA shifted, and our orbit happened to cross the interest of NASA, which means that they were looking for exploration of potentially habitable environment. And we had been working on a very large impact crater lake, or ancient impact crater lake, on Mars. So this got selected. I got selected on the Mars Exploration Rover Science team. And as we were exploring the Gusev crater, my mind was already racing a little further, saying, okay, we have demonstrated habitability on Mars, but what if life was there? And the two rovers, Spirit and Opportunity, were absolutely not equipped to search for life. So I was wondering how we could help the next generation of mission, the kind of things that Perseverance, for instance, is doing. So that led to, where could we find a place on Earth that would be an analog to what Mars or Gusev was 3.8 billion years ago. And this is how Mars connected to the Andes, and how, my fascination for Mars at the very beginning is really around habitability. The questions for life and how we explore them stemmed from that, but came from a different place.
Now, you say, and Viking were the first successful landers on Mars, and they have had experiments to look for life. I think, the concept of Mars being habitable in the past, I think that's beyond dispute now with all of the evidence. Why was there such a long gap between landers or rovers that specifically were searching for life, which Viking did, and Perseverance now? Why the change in sort of scientific payload for the intervening missions?
Well, that goes back to one of the greatest paradoxes of astrobiology, is that we are looking for life somewhere beyond the Earth, and we don't really have a good definition for life. We have many definitions, and in fact, there are descriptions, there are not definitions. So, in fact, we are looking for something we really don't know what it is, and this is what we stumbled into when we landed with Viking. We had 3 biological experiments because Viking was, in fact, the first mission to land, but also the first search for life mission kind of experiment. So we had 3 experiments on board, 3 biological experiments, and 2 of them were very ambiguous about the results. Some people still today think that we found life on Mars, although there is the vast majority of the population of the scientific community, I would say, really think that what we see is the reaction of the environment. But why we couldn't say that at the time is because we had no clue of what the environment was. And so when NASA saw that, they said, okay, if we are serious about looking for life, we cannot do that without having a good understanding of what the environment is. Because if you want to simplify, then you can say that life and the environment, this is a convolution. So if you really want to do a caricature of that, you are saying this is an equation with 2 unknowns.
Yeah.
In fact, it's a lot more complicated than that, because if you think of the Earth, then the physical environment gives you the constraints for what type of biochemistry can happen. But once life is here, it changes everything. Yeah. Today on Earth, we have 70% of the minerals that would not exist if life did not emerge on Earth. Yeah. So life really messes everything up. Yeah. But let's say that we have a 2 unknown equation for life and environment. Then if you know, the more you know about the environment, the better off you are trying to figure out what life is and what the environment is. So this is what NASA wanted to do.
We weren't actually ready to look for life, you're saying.
No, we weren't.
When Viking landed, that it was too much of a blank slate.
There was too much of a blank slate, and it was a lot worse than that, because I'd say that when Mariner 4 left, which was the very first orbiter to leave for Mars, well, there were still people thinking, of Lowell and and others, that we would find crystal cities and domes on Mars, that was a given. And of course, everybody was highly disappointed when the very blurry first images came and it looked exactly like the moon. It's really Mariner 9 that changed that vision and started showing the valleys and channels and valles marineris, volcanoes, polar caps, etc. We knew of the polar caps, but we could see them. So we had no clue when we landed there. And in Viking, we tried to to find life, because that was the 70s. And there was this big optimism about sending the first missions into the solar system and figure it out. Are we alone? Even if it's a matter of microbes, life would be life. We wouldn't be alone. It would be a different, hopefully a different genesis, or maybe a shared one, but a different planet, inhabited planet. So this was ambiguous. Then the next mission, we had 4 decades of mission trying to figure out what was the past geology, past climate of Mars. Was it habitable? And once we figured out from orbit that it was really looking good, then we picked 2 landing sites to send Spirit and Opportunity to get the ground proof that Mars was habitable, but there was no life experiment on board.
Yeah. So now we're ready. Now we're ready to look properly. And
we are ready to look for life, as we still don't have a clue what it is. And also, I would say, I'd say that's the same issue. We know a lot better the environment, so we have better clues, but we still don't know what life is.
Yeah. So we got a lot of it, and thank you. Do send in your questions. We'll get to your questions in a little bit. And thank you very much for letting us know where you're tuning in from. We got people from Montreal, Newcastle under Lyme in the UK, Tampa, and India. and London, Berlin, and Wisconsin. And there's a lot of tuning in, but nobody from the Azores yet. Hopefully that will happen. So now we're looking for life on Mars, and of course, Perseverance rover is doing something that no other rover has done. It's sort of boxing up bits of Mars ready to ship back to Earth, to put it crudely. And the idea that in the 2030s there will be a mission called Mars Sample Return to bring those samples back to Earth. And that's going to lead us to two lines of questioning. One is about the whole concept of bringing alien materials back to the Earth, but there's also the practicality. Is the idea, of course, is that the however sophisticated these rovers are, they're not sophisticated enough to do the analysis that a lab on Earth would do. What are the sort of, once you get those samples back, what are the sort of experiments that they're going to run on these samples in a broad sense?
So there are lots of geochemical analysis, obviously, that you want to do. You want to understand better the composition. You want to see, what kind of isotopes you find into your samples. Luckily, if we have the same luck as we had with the meteorite, we might even have some gases trapped. There's probably, I don't know exactly the content of the first cache of material, but I'm hoping that within then we have some air bubbles that may be trapped, in very early material coming out, like magma pouring at the surface, capturing in a bubble the atmosphere of Mars 3.8 billion years ago. So this would tell us a number of things, what it is made of, isotopes, etc. So we are doing this. When you are looking at what should happen if everything was fine, doing a lot of work in the field, I really prefer to always analyze the sample in the field, because no matter how well you preserve them, you are going to modify them from their environment. Even now, trapped in those tubes, they are protected for a number of things, but they haven't been protected for a number of things for billions of years.
Yeah.
So we've done the homework, and we probably know the type of modification that can happen in those tubes. But still, we are going to bring them to the Earth, and then they are going to be put in boxes, exactly like the lunar samples. And we are going to run all sorts of analysis. I was mentioning, gas analysis, and we're going to do composition. We are going to be doing textures. We are going to be doing microscopy. We are going to study them in many different wavelengths, looking at the possible presence of organics, or anything that could look like a biosignature, and you can have biosignatures of different nature. Some of them, if we were very, very lucky, would be physical biosignatures, like fossil. But you remember what happened with the Allen Hills meteorite. It took many years.
We may or may not get time to deal with that, but that's a fascinating tale, isn't it?
Exactly. And you have, chemical biosignature, and all sorts of them. I would say that it is very likely that if there aren't any, they are going to be very small, not so obvious. Mars is an unforgiving environment. So, but it is important to understand what kind of environment was there on Mars at the time where those sediments were deposited. So this is really very, very exciting.
Yeah. Now, one thing you mentioned is, that there's nothing like a human scientist getting their hands on a sample to do the analysis. And of course, that leads to the question of whether there should be humans stomping around on the surface of Mars. And indeed, it's probably going to happen at some point. Not something I particularly want to do, but, there's some people who would be very excited about going to Mars. There is that problem then of the idea of bringing human mud, and microbes and everything to Mars, and then bringing potentially Mars microbes back to the Earth. And this is a topic called planetary protection, the idea that you do not want to contaminate other worlds, and you do not want other worlds to contaminate the Earth. first of all, do you think it's good for humans to go to Mars? And if so, what would you like to see in place to make sure that this is done well?
So, I don't think, Simon, I don't think this is a matter of being good or bad.
Mhm,
I think this is something that's ingrained in our DNA, and probably the reason why life is here on Earth is because it explores, it multiplies its environment where it can adapt and give itself more chance to survive.
mhm,
We have put a lot of poetry and romanticism and many other goals and topics around this. But first and foremost, exploration is life trying to figure out a way to survive, and so it will happen. It
mhm,
will happen. I am an explorer, and I certainly think that it should happen at some point.
mhm,
This is who we are. Um, what I have some disagreement with is how fast it should happen. And we are just now starting to put things together when it comes to, what was Mars in the past, where we should be searching for life. And right now we're hearing things, and I don't know if they are realistic or not, but we are hearing schedules and deadlines for humans on Mars within the next 10, 15 years, which is basically when we would be bringing the first samples back. And the first samples back are unlikely to give us an answer when it comes to life. They are going to give us a better view of where to search and how to search for it.
mhm,
So here you have sometime human exploration telling you, well, but we have to have a schedule to pull the plug and see, okay, you do your things and then we move in. But so it's not that simple. I think the simple answer would be we find life and then we can tell them, okay, there is life. We can analyze it. We know whether it's related to us or not. If it's related to us, actually, it might be more of a problem than it is if it is not.
mhm,
Because as you know, especially viruses, they tend to evolve with their co-host.
mhm.
If we don't have any relationship with each other, then we have a better chance. We stand a better chance. And
Right.
my point with this argument from human exploration is always to tell them, if you find life, if humans, contaminate Mars, that would be a disaster, because this is really a pristine world where we can learn a lot of things, and not only about another genesis, but also our chance, if these microbes or whatever they are related to us,
Mm,
to understand where we are coming from. But if you really don't care about that aspect of things, I think you might care about Martian life finding you before you find it,
mhm. Yeah.
because what I'm saying is that we don't know. We don't know if life exists on Mars, if it's related or not to the Earth, if it's two separate genesis, etc. And or good or bad, one can be for the other.
Mhm,
So when you take samples and you bring them back home, like this is going to happen in containers, in controlled environment all the time, then very, very little risk of something happening. I think
mhm,
that it's pretty clear. But when you're sending a human crew to Mars, they're going to get there after a number of months of being in space. So they're not going to be in tiptoe shape when it comes to their physical, abilities. So their immune system is going to be lower, anyways. The last thing you want is them to have to deal with things that they don't understand.
yeah.
So what I'm saying is that I certainly think that humans should go to Mars. I personally absolutely do not see a rationale
Mhm,
for going fast,
mhm,
unless, I mean, scientific rationale, let's put it that way,
mhm, mhm,
for going there fast. um, I think that uh, we have time. We
mhm,
have time to and and there are also ways of doing this in the best for everybody. Right now, it's just everybody's pulling, in their directions, and science always takes time. That's the thing, you know. Unfortunately, this is not Star Trek. This is not science fiction. We don't zap. Yes, we zap stuff, but it takes more time. We are not teleporting from one place to another. Human exploration has its own pace, but at the same time, the information that we want to get from Mars is highly important for human exploration. And so what you were referring to, the paper that Alberto and I published in Nature, is really about that, how we can sit all parties around the table and find a way and a schedule. And I was going back to this schedule saying, you know, for science, the easiest way would be, yes, we found life, you know, maybe if we're lucky in perseverance sample. So we know that life is there, and it tells us something about how to protect it and how to protect ourselves while we're still exploring. The hardest answer is going to be the no answer. And, you know, you don't see life in the samples you have. Does that mean that life doesn't exist, has not survived on Mars? No, it doesn't. And I think that at some point, obviously, people who want to get astronauts on Mars are going to tell us, you know, when do we pull the plug on this? I might interject, but I would say that if they really want to pull the plug on astrobiology, they have at least to let us a chance to find something. We just started. As you said, Perseverance is the first one looking for life. We are 5 years now into the mission. It's nothing. It's nothing. So I think that the schedule that has been given is premature in the first place. There are propulsion issues. There are logistical issues. And there is the reality of having a crew on Mars. And, you know, having studying Mars for 20 years, there is the romantic vision of exploring Mars. And there is going to be the reality of exploring Mars. And those two may be very, very different.
So we now have the wisdom, scientific wisdom, and hopefully explorers' wisdom to do this right. We owe it to our
That's the point of the paper. It's not a criticism of human exploration. Absolutely none. And, you know, who would I be to do that? You know, I'd be the first one to go. The only difference with some of the people, I would like to come back because I know exactly what's waiting for me out there, but I still would like to go and explore and understand. That's not the point. I'm all for human exploration, but I don't see the rationale for rushing it.
Right.
Unless, I mean, at least a scientific rationale.
So we've got time for a couple of questions here. I'm just going to ask, we have a question from Anthony about the Viking mission and what happened to all that data? Has the data been revisited from the Viking?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch what you were saying.
Yes.
Oh, the Viking mission. Okay. So the Viking mission has been, well, I, for one, did my master thesis and PhD thesis on the Viking mission, and it was already 15-year old. So people continue to look at this data. And this is why I said that right now the consensus, well, I shouldn't say that because there are still people thinking that, you know, we found something on Mars with the Viking data. But the vast majority of the scientific community thinks, especially in light of what we found with the Phoenix lander and all the oxidants, perchlorates that we found, that this is actually what we saw in the Viking data. So it is still being analyzed. And it is being revisited, and that's why we're building those huge databases.
That's great. Thank you, and thank you, Yasmin, for putting the questions down at the bottom there. Next one from Holger, and this is maybe a more general question about protection of the environment. If a rover sees a sign of water nearby, surface water in whatever form, would it drive to it to investigate, or would it avoid it? This is a scientific dilemma, isn't it?
This is a wonderful question.
Mhm,
And believe me or not, we ran into that question not so long ago, a few years ago, with one of the rovers.
mhm,
There were signs of a gully not too far away from the rover.
mhm,
And one of the questions was, should we go or should we not go? And so there is ice. Even now we know a lot of ice close to the surface, but right now what the decision is at this point in time today, it may change tomorrow, but at this point in time today, is that uh, the rovers are not getting close to anything that looks like fluid or ice exposed. um, and there might be, we might want to think a little bit more about it. So what's happening is that you don't want to land right next to a place like that, because there are a lot of things that are happening. You know, you have the jet when you're landing, the crane, etc. So there is also this spacecraft coming from a different planet, and we do sterilize them to the best of our knowledge and technology and ability. Sorry,
mhm,
but this is all we can do, right? So you don't want this spacecraft coming in contact with ice or melting ice, because then if there is water, we know that the environment is not too different. We found signs of nutriments, magnesium and stuff in the polar cap, so we have to be careful.
mhm,
After a few days, I would say personally, maybe people are going to wave their arms, but in my defense, I'm a geologist, I'm not a biologist. So once the rover is exposed at the surface for a few days, is completely exposed to short UV, to cosmic rays, to a number of things that I think make them self-sterilizing.
mhm,
Uh,
mhm,
I personally wouldn't think that a rover after a few years on Mars is really a danger of contamination unless it's leaking something, which I don't see
mhm,
what it could be. But really,
mhm,
a lander might be leaking something, but a rover wouldn't.
mhm.
So, in theory, we could, but landing on a place like that right now is not allowed.
Yeah, yeah. Time for one more question. This is from a Mathematica. If there is water deeper under the surface of Mars, is it ever possible to find, to reach that, to find evidence of life
So
in
this
that
is
position there?
where this is the exception I make to human exploration.
Mhm,
Right now, we have been exploring the very top layer of the Martian soil, and it is very unlikely that anything, even fossil biosignature,
mhm,
survived in this kind of environment, much too hostile. With ExoMars has a 2 meter drill, so we'll go a little deeper.
mhm,
It's still very, very, close to the surface. There are a number of reasons why we can think that life could communicate. We have mobile, underwater, not underwater, subsurface layers on Mars. There is a lot of ice and climate changes, and everything is mobile. But so there is a slight possibilities that we could find life higher than we thought it would be. But as far as Mars goes, there are a couple of things that are happening that are really neat. Is that the more you go deep into the subsurface of Mars, well, the pressure increases. That's the pressure of the rock, the lithostatic pressure.
mhm,
So, and then the temperature increases. This is the temperature gradient of the planet. So both of those things increase, and there is a range of depth on Mars where water has enough pressure and temperature is warm enough to keep it liquid. And this range is between 500 meter and a kilometer.
mhm,
So the idea is if life emerged on Mars, then it is likely that it has migrated in these areas where you have a very stable environment, actually, because I was talking about this mobile layer, which is the first few hundred meters. But conversely, beyond that depth, you have something that is pretty much immune of what's happening on top. So it's a very stable environment over billions of years. The only thing that's going to change is maybe the amount of water that's circulating in there, the amount of heat. If you have a hotspot that's going and coming and going and maybe dying in time. But we also know that there is still magma moving under the surface of Mars. So yes, I would say that it is actually the best place to look. And this is my exception to human exploration, is because this record has been sealed under the surface for a very long time. And it is impractical to robotically drill. It's very, very complicated, even on Earth, even with people. But astronauts would be the best people to actually drill down very deep, because they would have ways to seal what they are getting out of the subsurface and making as sterile as possible to avoid contamination. So this is really where I think that in a few years or decades from now, when we say there is no life close to the surface, maybe human exploration can go and look for life deeper.
So that Mars is holding its secrets very, very tight in that way, and then it's time to go. So yes. Nathalie Cabrol, thank you so much for taking time out of your exploration of the wonderful volcanic chain of the Azores. Just a reminder that the SETI Institute is a non-profit scientific research institute, and a lot of the work we do is made possible by generous donations from you all. And please do take a look at our website, SETI.org, to hear about any of the science that's going on here at the Institute, and sign up for our newsletter to see ways that you can continue to support the work that we do. My name is Simon Steele, and we will see you again soon for another SETI Live. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Simon.